6 hijacked airplanes, over 40 burglaries, 73 stolen cars, and even his own fortress with weapons in the forest to protect himself from the police. No, this isn't a Grand Theft Auto mission, but the life of Colton Harris Moore. He was once the world's most wanted 16-year-old and kept North America on its toes with spectacular crimes. In this video, we'll tell you his incredible story and show you how he first committed crimes at the age of just 7, and why the police were unable to catch him for years, even with the best methods. So, if you'd like to find out more about one of the most incredible criminals of all time, stay tuned here on Wise Fool. But before we find out how Colton Harris Moore became not only America's most wanted criminal, but also one of its most notorious, let's briefly explain who this boy is. Colton was born in 1991 in the western state of Washington. Instead of growing up like any other child, he was unfortunately raised in a terribly unstable home. His parents, who were not married, separated when he was just 2 years old. He then lived with his mother and her new husband, albeit in extremely precarious conditions. His mother had family problems, and his new stepfather died of an overdose when Colton was just 7. From that day on, nothing was the same. Colton no longer had a stable family environment in which to be properly raised, and so he began to live by his own rules. By the age of 7, he was running away from home and hiding in the woods for days at a time. As his mother couldn't look after him, he began to steal small objects more and more often. One day, he even broke into his own school to steal laptops, cameras, and radios. He committed his first real crimes at the age of 11. Not only was he constantly stealing money and valuables from others, but he also committed his first robbery at this age. As a result, already a familiar face to the local police, he was repeatedly sentenced to a few days' imprisonment or had to pay small fines. It wasn't, however, until 2006 that things really got extreme, when Colton committed his first crime at the age of 15. A crime that would change his life forever. That year, he was caught stealing a credit card and $3,700. However, instead of going to court, he made a terrible decision, one in which childhood experiences served him well. He fled into the forest, where he remained hidden for 7 months. 7 months during which he could not be caught, even by the best police officers, and even though he was completely on his own, he survived without the slightest problem. That is, until he was finally arrested at the beginning of 2007. The authorities caught him in the middle of a burglary, and he was sentenced to 3 years in a maximum security prison. However, for good behavior, he was transferred after a year to a more moderate prison far from home. However, this sentence also ended sooner than expected, because on April 29, 2008, he broke the window of his cell and fled across the United States into the woods near his former home during an Operation Night and Fog. It was at this very moment that the crime story began that could have been completely out of a Hollywood movie or a Grand Theft Auto mission. In the fall of 2008, Colton became interested in airplanes. Although he had never actually flown in one, he used a flight simulator on his stolen laptop to familiarize himself with the supposed controls of a small plane. And although it sounds absolutely surreal, a few weeks later, at the age of just 16, he flew a Cessna 182 on a local airfield without ever having taken a single flying lesson. After getting it off the ground without a hitch, he flew it for over 1,000 kilometers across the United States. He nearly lost his life on landing, however, when his obvious lack of experience caused the plane to crash and catch fire. Colton miraculously escaped unharmed, however, and once again fled into forests that were, this time, totally unknown to him. From that day on, having endangered not only his own life, but that of the entire American people with this action, he now faced a whole new problem. He was now on the FBI's wanted list. Now hunted by the toughest unit of the American police force, Colton had to go into hiding. For a year, there was virtually no trace of him, although he managed to stay one step ahead of the FBI. In mid-2009, he reached the state of Idaho. There, he reboarded a small plane and flew 420 kilometers back to his home in Washington state. Once again, a lack of fuel led to a crash landing, from which Colton once again miraculously emerged unscathed. During this period, he mostly just enjoyed flying. On several occasions, he flew smaller planes and made rounds with them in the border region between Canada and the United States. As a result, this young man became an international criminal pursued by two countries at once. Colton had so far caused a total of $1 million in damage through theft and burglary alone at the age of just 16. Meanwhile, the police still had no trace of him, and this lasted until 2009, when he went from being a criminal to an official delinquent. That year, he broke into his hometown police station and stole an assault rifle, ammunition, and a handgun. He then used the loot to build himself a small fortress in the forest, warning hundreds of yards away that anyone attempting to stop him would be in mortal danger. Although the police and FBI were now desperate to catch a juvenile, Colton Harris Moore's criminal career came to an abrupt end in July 2010. That month, Colton once again took to the skies in a stolen airplane. This time, he flew to the Bahamas, thousands of miles from his hideout. There, he stole a speedboat, but was spotted by the local police. The Bahamian authorities immediately gave chase and fired on the boat until it was unable to continue. Colton was arrested immediately afterwards and extradited to the USA. There, he was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for theft, reckless endangerment, illegal armament, and flight from justice, at just 20 years of age and after a 13-year criminal career. The Colton Harris Moore phenomenon, however, goes far beyond his period of active criminality. Even today, he has thousands of fans on the internet who idolize him for his lifestyle. To them, he's a boy who lived only by his own rules, allowing himself a life without limits, with whatever he wanted. In other words, with everything he never had as a child. What's more, since he didn't harm anyone, many fans don't consider him a major criminal. His story was also told several times in documentaries and feature films after his arrest. A few years ago, a book was even written about his life, and is now considered by many to be an outstanding novel for young people. Even the police and FBI agents involved have had to admit that, despite his age, Colton Harris Moore was one of the most intelligent and cunning criminals they ever had to deal with. Tell us what you think in the comments. Do you think Colton Harris Moore is just a rebel who took what he thought was his due because of his difficult childhood? Or is he a selfish, unscrupulous criminal who puts others in danger without caring about the consequences?